So you may have a graph and you have a slope A and B, 2 points, a straight line. It has length and it has a midpoint. You can even detect the midpoint. It's looking like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 0, 2, the midpoint. But it also has a gradient, a slope. Okay. So therefore now, here's some definitions happening there. In terms of gradient, we need to find the gradient between those 2 points. And here you have up is equal to 8 squares, the change in y. Okay. So the change in y is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And when y changes by 8, x changes by 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So this gives you the origin of the concept of gradient, the rate at which y changes with respect to the rate at which x changes. So if y changes by 8, and at the same time x changes by 4, you have a gradient of 8 divided by 4, which is 2. Okay. Now that 2 now is 2 over 1, because 4 into 4 goes once, 4 into 8 goes 2 times. So by definition, that 2 there means whenever y varies by 2, x varies by 1. Okay. That's how you can interpret that gradient of 2. Whenever y rises, you see the word rise. Whenever y rises by 2, x runs by 1. Okay. With every 1 variation of x, right? That's also be x. With every 1 variation of x, y varies by 2. And look at it. If you go to the graph, let's bring the graph there. Enlarge the graph. There it is. If you look carefully, when x changes by 1, y changes by 1, 2, and that's the gradient. The gradient itself, if you have a gradient of 2, it means that whenever x changes by 1, y changes by 2. If you have a gradient of 8, let's say you have a gradient of 54, when x changes by 1, y changes by 54. If you have a gradient of 27, when x changes by 1, y changes by 27. So whenever you have a gradient, the x changes by 1, the y changes by that number. So we have a gradient of 2, and look at it. When x changes by 1, y changes by 1, 2. When x changes by 1, y changes by 1, 2. So that's the gradient of 2. Whenever the x varies by 1, the y varies by that gradient value, and in that case, it is 2, rise over run, and that's the gradient of this slope gradient between 2 points. Very important concept. Rise over run.